you support gun control? Why or why not?
We do support gun control because gun control is one of the leading causes of death in the US. And almost 38,000 people have died by gun violence and almost 85,000 have been injured. So gun violence is a major problem in this country and we plan to address it.
I do to an extent, I don't think that, some 15-year-olds should just be able to walk into a store and buy a gun. But, I think we're all focusing on the wrong thing. I think we need to focus on why people want guns and not how they get them. I think we should notice a pattern by now that as long as there is supply and demand for something, regardless of legality, people will be able to get it. So we need to solve the underlying roots of gun violence, which is socioeconomic problems.
I think for me, we need to address what can we do. And the Constitution clearly states that we can't have certain limitations on guns, but how they get them is something we need to talk about. 1 in 9 people who purchase firearms could not legally have it based off a background check. Only 20 out of 50 states have a background check on gun control, and so we need to have a universal system from all 50 states to have the same system to have a background check.
Me personally, minimal gun control such as greater background checks and greater mental evaluation for most people.
I would say our party does support more gun control. A lot of research has shown that in states where there are like stronger laws, there's less where people have died. I think that it's crucial because it's been deemed a public health epidemic by scientists and doctors all over the US. And it's now the leading cause of death in children and teens.
I do personally support gun control. Our party is big on heightening background checks, and this is just to make sure that the wrong people don't get access to guns. And our reason for this is because we just want to make sure that people who are mentally unstable or not prepared to own a gun don't get access to them.
I also support gun control, but to a limit. I do support that people who have gone through the right certification to get the gun can own it, whether that be for protection or for their personal use, but I don't think people who are just using it just for fun should have one.
I do support gun control. Our system we have right now is incredibly flawed. I think we need more mental health screenings, and that's one of the biggest problems we have. It's not the people that have the guns, the people that have the mental issues are causing these mass shootings, the biggest killings in the United States today.
It seems that background checks are a general consensus. I'd love to know what you guys would do. Like, how would you ensure that people who fail those background checks are not able to purchase a gun legally? Sort down there. I will pass.
Well, the reality is that they will be. As long as they want one, there are more guns than people in the United States. And, even if they're illegal, so when we banned alcohol, prohibition, there was supply and there was demand. And alcohol was still distributed and still produced, and it will be the same with guns. So there's no real solution to it just by saying you can't do it. We have to say, here is why you want guns, and we need to solve why they want guns.
I agree to a certain extent with him. I think that is an issue that we're never going to find the actual answer. But on paper, we need that. With my plan, you would have a set in stone universal background check, and with that, you will have every single gun salesperson or company would be set to a certain standard. And if that standard is not met, they will be basically made repercussions. But at the same time, that's not going to be 100% foolproof. We see that it's not going to happen.
For me, it would be a universal database with everybody who's trying to purchase a firearm, who owns a firearm, who it allows people to know who has what and what prior classes you've taken, everything about that, just all in one database that's readily available to all.
I think for people that don't pass the exam or the universal background check and they really want one, they're gonna get one regardless. But I think if there was programs in place for those that didn't pass, and programs that could be to make whatever area they lacked in to make it better. That way they didn't have to go and get one illegally. I think that would also maybe be a potential solution.
So the main places that people are actually illegally purchasing guns are at flea markets and then gun shows. So I think increasing the supervision on these gun shows or just completely eliminating them and then increasing the supervision at like flea markets, that would probably lower the amount of people who are illegally buying guns.
I also agree with all what they kind of said about like the databases and like the different programs that they can enforce. I think that'll all work great, and I think me and my team will create a program that will create better laws and restrictions in place so that people do get the guns if they want them.
Definitely thinking having more regulations in place and having like more like hard ways to get it is definitely a way, to limit everything. Having a database as well as Cameron said would definitely help like track the guns and like who has it and like how to take it back if they're using it unlawfully.
Should we move on to the fire?
Can I comment on that? When it comes to a database, the reality is major of gun violence comes from illegal purchasing, which can't be found in database things. And so a big issue is allowing people to buy it the right way. With the database, that's not gonna do much in my opinion because you're not gonna be able to track things that are illegally bought, which is the biggest issue.
Go ahead.
So my opinion, as you said, yes, most guns are purchased illegally. Around 70% of guns are purchased illegally. So we need to implement more policies and more policies that are able to crack down on these illegally purchased weapons and the people who are actually selling these illegal weapons.
Any further comments before we move on? Okay. What do you see as the most logical plan to address our issues surrounding greenhouse gases, global warming, and climate change?
Oh, right, yeah. So I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I'm a scientist and I know everything. I'm a politician. So I say that I think one of the biggest problems in America is that we spend way too much on our military and not enough on our actual people, our citizens. So I'm saying we defund the military and we redirect those funds to, state mandates for green energy, solar panels, stuff like that. And, further scientific research on green energy.
So for me, as a party, we would want to move towards more into a state of using nuclear energy. It is proven that nuclear energy has the highest capacity factor when compared to many other energy sources. So this would substitute other resources that we're using, for example, natural gas, coal, and so it's almost 3 times more reliable than wind and solar plants as well. And so as a nation, if we move more into nuclear energy, that would be a much more effect to what we want to do as a country.
I agree completely. I think it's a pretty simple idea. Nuclear energy is the future. So I believe that we should allocate more funds into the Lawrence Livermore Lab, who has recently created nuclear fusion, which creates 0 greenhouse gases, and the only thing that it is, byproduct is helium, which can be repurposed and reused in multiple ways.
I think for our party, instead of looking at it as like on a bigger scale, we kind of see it as more individual and like what each individual can do. So like, for example, like we could gradually start replacing some of these technologies that use fossil fuels with like simple things as switching to LED light bulbs at home, or like energy efficient appliances, or even like washing your laundry with cold water or doing it at night would save a lot of energy. So I think like if everyone pitched in and did their little part, it would make a big impact on everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We're looking at like reducing individual carbon footprint. So just doing the little things and like, that it's not gonna just like, we're not gonna make some huge switch instantly, so just gradually switching to renewable energy from the use of fossil fuels. So for example, we could start by switching from gas cars to electric vehicles instead of just being like, oh, let's start biking and walking everywhere.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really hard to just switch automatically. We can't obviously do that because we've already made a major footprint or damage to our world. So I think starting with the little things like Alexa and May said, how we can all take our part individually, and then greenhouse gases, we can utilize green building practices, which can reduce the environmental impact of new housing developments. I think that could also help.
I think transitioning more to renewable energy is definitely the way to go. Definitely using more power plants, nuclear power plants, because it's more sufficient, a lot more easier to use. Also provides more energy. Not transitioning right away to that, like switching away from fossil fuels, using that would be really bad. It would hurt our economy, our way of living, pretty much. So we definitely need to take it slow.
I think we should start to move away from the use of oil because drilling it and moving it causes a lot of environmental impacts like oil spills and the production of gas and plastic too. So we even see it today with starting to use biodegradable products and making those more widespread, and then also the use of electric cars is becoming more popular too. So I think just making those ideas more popular and more accessible will definitely see an impact on the environment.
So the answer is being alternative fuels, personal efforts, highlighting the personal efforts. What would you do as an individual to improve the environment, your own actions? What own actions would you take?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess, we can always not litter or, use reusable water bottles, but that won't do anything in the large scale of things. A fracking company, one single fracking rig is gonna produce billions times more than we all will, in terms of emissions, than we all will in this entire classroom and in our entire life. Sure, you can do that, but it's gonna be a very small difference, and I don't think we have time to worry about, just, recycle and it'll all be okay anymore. I think we need more large scale solutions.
We should have started 20 years ago. What we do as a person, maybe I can get an electric car, maybe I can have a healthier lifestyle with gas emissions, but at the end of the day, this is something that needs to be done at such a large scale, which should have been done, like I said, 20 years ago. And so I think a bigger issue is what can we do as a nation, what can I contribute to as a person, to what organizations that are gonna move that. And so that's the direction that we need to go as a country, not as a person, in my opinion.
Like you said, individual, I'm thinking more large scale. I'm thinking everybody in the world. I'm thinking a switch from single-use plastics to a more reusable, more environmentally friendly substitute, such as paper straws, aluminum bottles that can be reused, glass bottles that can also be reused and recycled.
I think I agree with how we should have started a very long time ago, because I think we're getting to a point where it's the point of no return, where we're already too late in the process of trying to eliminate some of the contamination. But I think again, like I said, if everyone does their little part, then I think if everyone contributes, it will contribute to the larger. And I think even if it's just a little difference, it's worth the effort to try to make a difference.
I think that I would cut down on unnecessary travel to try to reduce CO2 emissions. And as a politician, I do have to travel a lot, so I would try to use as much public transportation as possible.
Yeah, I agree with them. I think, should have started a long time ago. I think the little things do matter though, so starting with us, obviously, I think it would be easier if we start now. Well, actually, it would have been easier if we started later. But I think if we started earlier, that obviously would have been better, but if we start now, each of us, then I think we can all make it to the large scale, like Alexa said.
Definitely agree with them. Most of my counterparts up here, we definitely should have started at least 20 years ago. So that's when we could have gotten a grip on everything about climate change and the total world of pollution. As of right now, we just need to focus on the big companies like fracking and polluting our atmosphere and damaging our environment.
Any other comments on this topic before we move on?
I have a question. Carbon pricing is the market strategy of placing a tax on carbon emissions from large companies. Do you feel this approach would help alleviate America's carbon footprint, and if so, do you think large companies should receive a cap on carbon emissions that they can tax each year?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Carbon pricing is the market strategy of placing a tax on carbon emissions from large companies. Do you feel this approach would help alleviate America's carbon footprint, and if so, should large companies receive a cap on carbon emissions that they cannot pass?
That's very tricky. I think, you know, corporations, if you know one thing about corporations, they will do anything to preserve their bottom line and their profit. So I think that might contribute to the economy in some ways that we wouldn't necessarily like. You know, because if they were forced to use alternatives to what is currently polluting the climate that they're using now, you know, that would probably be more expensive, and in an effort to preserve their profits, they would have to raise prices, which would, you know, contribute to our problem of already having a, you know, terrible inflation and rising prices. So I would be hesitant to do that, you know, because I know that a lot of Americans, lower middle class, are already struggling with, you know, with inflation in the economy. But I wouldn't necessarily rule it out.
Is it a solution to our problem? Absolutely. Do we have the power to do that as the federal government? I don't think so. I think that would be very detrimental to businesses. And so, in my opinion, should we put a cap? Absolutely not, because that would be too much of an infringement, in my opinion, on the company. However, can we have an increase in price the more you use? Maybe. Maybe there's a bracket of once you hit a certain amount used, you get charged more. So maybe that can regulate it. But to put a cap on it as a whole would be detrimental to our economy.
Personally, I do agree with Justin, with the idea of a bracket system. I do agree that there should not be a cap, because why, should the government have that strong of a role on capping what a business can and cannot do? I am very strongly against that. But I do agree that the use of a taxation of the pollution of businesses will decrease the amount of pollution being caused by that company.
I think like Levi said, to everything in life, there's a downside. So yes, you can impose taxes on something, but there's always gonna be that negative side, and it really depends on how you look at it. I think imposing taxes on like large corporations would be a good idea. And maybe this would kind of lower their contributions to greenhouse gases and contamination. But again, like there is that factor that plays in where there would be rising prices, and then it would hurt lower and middle class Americans.
Yeah, I do think that there should be a cap on the carbon emissions, but it should be high enough to the point where it wouldn't hurt the economy too much, and businesses would still be able to run and perform the same way. And if it discourages them from, you know, doing what they're doing and releasing a ton of carbon emissions, then like that's fine.
Yeah, so that was a very good question. I think me and my team would have to further research that topic in order to give you an honest answer from us.
I would say the same thing. We also need more research, but I don't think a cap would help the general economy. It definitely would regulate the amount of pollution we put in the air. Also, I think the taxing would also work to regulate that, the amount of pollution they put out. But it definitely would hurt the economy to put a cap on them.
I think that charging for like a cap would definitely help the environment, but then there's also that downside of like hurting people who don't have the money to go and do that. So I think we should find like an alternative and try to enforce that in other ways.
Any other comments on this topic?
a nation, we wanna get very proactive in having, all electric cars and all these substitutions. For example, the state of California said by 2030 that they require every car to be all electric. The reality is, as a nation, we can't afford that. Our grid cannot afford all electric cars, and our country would fall apart. Literally, it would shut down with electric. And so, my party is very passionate on establishing a role where we actually start to build up, and to the point where in a couple of years we can start with these advancements. But as a country, we first have to prepare for this in general. We can't just do a full switch. We have to actually prepare that right away.
Anything else? Alright, let's move on, to Israel-Gaza. We all know that's going on right now. Should the US be playing a role in the conflict, and if so, what way should it be going?
Absolutely. As a party, we believe that this war is a war that is leaking into many other conflicts as a nation. This also goes with, as a whole general scheme, with Ukraine and Russia as well. When we don't play a role, we cause those wars to linger on, and it does affect our country. Go back to post-World War II days, we were a country that was revered throughout the world. We were a country where you didn't mess with us. We had people in place, we had troops everywhere, and we were the powerhouse of all the nations around us. And so now we are not that place anymore. And so if you elect me as president, we will be put back in that spot. We will be establishing ourselves as a country that you don't mess with. We are going to establish rules, and I believe that war against terror is something that we need to address, and it will bring peace, but also financial stability throughout our nation and the world.
Me personally, I believe that we should not get involved due to the fact that, like Justin said, we used to be a powerhouse in the world with our troops being all over the place. I firmly believe that we should not send our troops there, and that the lives of an American person is very valuable, and I do not believe in sending somebody over just to die.
I think that the US should really stop trying to get involved in conflicts that aren't theirs. Like, why are you in a conflict that has nothing, or not, like, it has little or nothing to do with you? I think the more, yes, it's bleeding into other conflicts, but I think the more countries get involved, the messier it gets. So I don't think that the US should play a role. And again, I don't think that there should be troops there either, getting in the way, or getting in harm's way.
Can I respond? So the reality is we also, the reason that we do that is because we have third world countries and people that don't have the representation like we do. We can make a difference for people in that home country who can't. For example, we had the Iran nuclear deal before Biden came into office. And with that, we were able to limit the nuclear power that they had. They were building atomic weapons. Since we canceled that deal, and we don't have any more tariffs on them and sanctions, now they're building it up again. Guys, Iran just attacked with drones the Israel mainland a couple days ago. And so if we don't make an effort, then you're gonna have every nation in the Middle East attacking them, and it's gonna be detrimental to, again, like I said, the whole case of Europe and Asia.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I agree. I do think we should send our troops to Israel, but minimally. I think we should just send the people in charge, so like the sergeants and generals. I don't think it's necessary to be sending like our whole military over there, because again, like, you know, American lives are valuable, like human life in general. So I don't think that we should just be sending everybody over there, because I don't think that's necessary. Our idea was to just directly target the Hamas terrorists with like no nuclear warfare, no bombs or anything like that, just using firearm. So yes, that would be our plan.
I also think the US should be involved in the conflict. I agree that we shouldn't be sending our whole military over, but I do think that if we send over a few or a couple thousand, that it could really help them out, because obviously they can't fight their own war and they're just getting attacked and it's not helping anything.
We should be there as a deterrent. We should be there putting troops on the ground. We should be there as a deterrent. We have capabilities to fire missiles at these terrorists. They're harming our civilians, their civilians. We have the ability to target them eliminate them and not harm anybody of our troops by putting them there, not harming anybody of Israel's troops, not harming any civilians. We've done this in Iraq for several years. It has helped as a deterrent from other countries invading that Middle East and causing more harm in that area.
I think that, the US should take a backseat in the conflict and stand by if help is needed. And like, cause the reality is you don't really know what is going to happen. So if something progresses more, we would consider it.
I personally find it disgusting that we send billions of dollars in aid to Israel while our domestic population, struggles. And I don't think that, it's worth funding, more weapons of destruction so that the IDF can melt school buses of Palestinian children while our domestic population can't afford, insulin. And I think that's a little silly as as a first world country and one of the richest countries in the world. I think that we should prioritize our domestic population first before, funding IDF spending sprees.
Should we go in? Do you have any questions on that?
Should we stay on this topic then?
Does anybody else have any other comments on this topic? Any questions for you,
Do you believe boycotting supporters of the Israel-Gaza conflict, such as Starbucks and McDonald's, is an effective way of protesting?
If you're asking me, I think that this is, I think it should be a question of how we regulate this. Of course, absolutely protesting for individual people, but as a government, I'm not gonna say that's something that I'm gonna worry about, especially because I'm gonna let that happen, but in my opinion, does this have such a high standard on my agenda? Not really, because, this doesn't take much government action.
Personally, I believe that this is such a singular issue and such a small factor that will not play a huge role.
I feel like it all depends on the scale of the movement. I think when it's like I feel like a lot of people, like maybe on social media, they're like, okay, like we don't like Starbucks or whatever, but then they go to Starbucks because it's convenient for them. Like, how is that helping? Like, it defeats the whole purpose of the movement. So I feel like if it's not really towards like a large scale and like people don't really commit to it, then there's no point to it.
Yeah, I just feel like this form of protest is completely unproductive and it's really not targeting the issue. We're here protesting in America, that's not gonna change the conflict in Israel and Gaza, so I don't really see the point.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is a very effective way of protesting.
It's not effective at all. Protesting Starbucks or like McDonald's is not gonna help fight terrorists in another nation, especially when A, they're fighting for their lives, their own homeland, and B, it's not effective at all. These companies are ways to make the boycott and ways to make the protest make a difference.
I do think that it is not really making a difference. I mean, you do see that the companies are losing money because the movement, I guess now is very big, like you see pretty much everyone on social media, or at least I do. But yeah, I feel like the effects, they're very minimal.
Yeah, I agree. It's not substantial at all. Like I said, Israel gets billions of dollars of aid from us, and not buying your morning coffee from Starbucks isn't gonna change, the havoc that Israel wreaks on the Gaza Strip.
Those of you who talked about becoming involved in this conflict, how would you do so? Because I know we all there seems to be a split of either being involved or not involved. How would you get involved in a manner that's gonna be effective, I guess is my question.
So for me, I do think that we need to go aggressive. Sending just generals, sending just like a small part of troops isn't making as much of an impact as it would, of course, with more troops with that, we know that we do make the solution as America. We are the country that does make the solution. We are the ones that will make the answers to the problem. And so without a full send, without allowing us to play a big role in this, we can't do enough for this country or for other countries. I think too, with a full send of troops and resources, we can cut down on the spending, which I agree with what Levi was saying. $61 billion in aid to Ukraine is unnecessary when it led to no change in the world, just more deaths. And so there needs to be a big, massive change in how we influence other countries.
Can I ask a question here? If you're sending more and more troops and more money, then how do you plan on peace? What's your party's plan for
So first of all, I want to be clear. My goal is to spend less money. $61 billion is unnecessary, and so when it comes to peace, I'm talking about a war on terror. Terrorists should not have a role to play at all in this country or in any other country. And so when it comes to the solution is eliminating the problem. And so yes, with that there isn't going to be immediate peace. But again, like I said, during the Cold War phase, we were actually providing money instead into rebuilding countries, and we're putting influence in the countries. And through that, we were able to grow democratic societies.
So just to be clear, you wouldn't support foreign involvement unless it's specifically on terrorists?
To an extent, I think, for example, going into Ukraine is very dangerous because of the opponent they have, which is Russia. We have to be dangerous on Russia, but when it comes to Middle Eastern countries, through historically what we've done, it is precedented for us to enter. I agree that with terror specifically, it is more of a right for us to enter because of what we've done as a country and what has happened through that.
Is there anybody else who talk about getting involved in the conflict?
So I said that we would send certain members of the military, like sergeants, generals, down to Israel to first of all attack the terrorists, and then also to protect the just citizens from the terrorists by some people are being held captive and getting kidnapped, so just protecting them overall and maybe providing them like food, shelter, all of that.
I agree. I would send the troops over, but I wouldn't send like a huge mass of them because I don't think that's effective, and I feel like that's just killing American lives, especially when we're not involved like heavily. So I think sending like a couple, and then analyzing the situation, really seeing what's happening down there in real sight, and then like from there we'd make a executive decision.
Can I ask a question? So what would the purpose of sending these higher ranking officials instead of, lower and less, there's all value in human life, but when it comes to higher ranking people, they're more educated on the issue itself. So what's the point of sending them instead of, somebody of a lower level?
Yeah, so somebody who's higher up in the military is usually more dedicated and they've had more experience. So A, they're more likely to be safe because they have more experience, they have more skill. And B, they're probably more willing to make a sacrifice like that if it comes to it. So I don't think it's necessary to send a bunch of troops down when we only need a few people. And I'm gonna choose the people who are more skilled in that area and are less likely to lose their life. So that's why.
And would you say that, let's say if there was mass casualty of these higher ranking officers, what would happen to the rest of the military and everybody who follows their orders?
Well, I wouldn't send every single sergeant down, just a few of them. So, they would probably be reorganized under a different sergeant.
If I want to touch on that, I think in my opinion, to send just sergeants without military personnel with it is like leading a lamb to the slaughter. In general, at that point, I would approach more an idea of not sending anyone than just sergeants in general. I think that would be detrimental to our specific military.
As we're wrapping up on time, does anybody have any other comments or questions to ask any of the candidates?
I just wanted to say on this last subject that, if the IDF wanted to or could target justice terrorists specifically, they would. And they don't. There's more than 29,000 Palestinian civilians killed, to this day. So, they're not just wanting to fight the terrorists, it's